So, hi, welcome to this Safer Internet Day panel debate discussion that we have going on here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this. We hope that you get an awful lot from the session. We've got some fantastic guests lined up to share with us across the course of today. The key themes for us to be considering across this panel discussion is how can we work together for a better internet, and we're going to look and explore and dig deep into how we can protect educators as well as young people when it comes to being safe online. Safer Internet Day has been celebrated for many, many years now. And as we all know, every day should be a safer internet day. But don't let me spend all of my time explaining all of these things to you, because we have a cornucopia of experience joining us for this discussion today. First up onto the panel discussion, I'm really excited to welcome the one and only Ken Corish to the conversation. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you.
Ken is Deputy CEO of the Southwest Grid for Learning. He's developed 360-degree safe online safety review tool, a fantastic tool if you haven't checked it out as well, which has been sort of tweaked into lots of different places and spaces, which is available on Hub in Wales, for example, and all over the place. Fantastic tool. He's a lead member of the UKCIS team as part of the Education for a Connected World, and he also led on the brilliant resource ProjectEVOLVE. Welcome to the conversation, Ken. Thanks again for joining us. Next up,
it's good to be here.
Thank you, Ken. Next up, we have Tracy Good. She's a content writer for ProjectEVOLVE. She's also a founder member of ACOS, and she's also the chief i-venger for the nationally recognized i-vengers online safety program. Welcome, Tracy, and thank you again for giving up some time to join us for this conversation today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great stuff. Thank you, Tracy. Next up, we have Al Kingsley. Al Kingsley is CEO at NetSupport. He's an author. He's a regional Schools Directorate board member for the East of England, and he's also the chair of a large multi-academy trust. He is somebody who sits on both sides, from the vendor side and on the education side as well, and has lots of experience to bring to the conversation today as well. So thank you to you, Al, for joining us as well. Thank you.
Hello. Lovely to be here.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Al. Next up as part of the conversation today, we have Emma Hardy. She's Communications Director for the Internet Watch Foundation, and she's also Director at the UK Safer Internet Centre as well. Thank you for joining us today, Emma. Really delighted to have you join us. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you. Next up, we have Tom Thelen. Tom is a children's mental health expert. He's an author and motivational speaker. Although, Tom, I was checking you out beforehand. Your Twitter handle and Instagram handle is bullying speaker. It isn't that you go to these events and sort of start picking on people. Is that not the case?
Well, it was a little bit of a shorter handle than anti-bullying speaker. And that's the topic I am most frequently hired to speak at schools, is bullying prevention. So I speak at about 100 schools a year. Since 2012, I've spoken at over 800 schools across the US and Canada.
Wow. So it keeps you out of mischief. So nothing keeps you out of trouble there then. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And then finally, we have Jerome Noguez, who's the head of French and digital learning at Packwood Hall Prep here in the UK. Welcome, Jerome. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you for having me.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you. So, as you can see, we have a almost a chessboard of guests full of experience joining us here for this conversation around Safer Internet Day. I want to jump straight into the questions and the conversations. So, as I said, we've got an awful lot of experience here, but I want to jump straight in to you first, Ken, if I could, please, because you've been involved in, back when I was teaching, you came to my school, you shared with the children in my school, you shared with my colleagues and staff as well. You've been someone who I've massively respected on the whole internet safety scene for a large part of my career, and someone who's not just inspired me, but many others as well. So as someone who's been heavily involved in the UK Safer Internet Centre with Safer Internet Day from the early days, could you share a little bit of the history of Safer Internet Day and what the focus is for this year? Is that okay?
Yeah, certainly, Mark, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. That's a lovely thing to say, so thank you. You've made my Friday. Safer Internet Day has been around since around about 2004, when it was part of the European Union's Safer Internet programme. And it's an annual event. We tend to abbreviate it to SID. So if you hear us talking about SID, we mean Safer Internet Day. SID's an annual event, takes place generally on the second Tuesday of February to promote safe and responsible use of the internet. And the goal is to, as you said, use it as a day to be able to celebrate and raise awareness of online safety issues and the various interventions that are available to people, and to encourage individuals to use the internet in a safe and secure manner. Along this sort of road that we've taken over the years, since that first one in 2004, it's also highlighted the importance of education, and particularly educating young people, as they're very often the most vulnerable to online risks. We very often imbue, don't we, children and young people with certain attributes that they know so much about technology, but they're children and they find themselves in very difficult and complex ecosystems, particularly social ecosystems online, that they require a little bit more than just oversight and guidance to. They need education to be able to help them navigate that. And that's something that SID has latched onto over the years. And whilst it started as an EU celebration, it's now grown to be a global, with more than 100 countries around the world becoming involved in the whole idea of it. Each year it's focused on a theme, and there's been a variety of themes in the past, so some examples of the past themes are things like Be the Change, Unite for a Better Internet, which was back in 2018. 2017, Let's Create a Better Internet Together. 2016 was Play Your Part for a Better Internet. And they're all hooks and strap lines that give anyone involved with Safer Internet Day the chance to focus on one particular aspect and examine it in a bit more granularity than just be nice online and the generic messages. This year's theme is Want to Talk About It. So this is very firmly rooted in amplifying young people's voice, opinion, suggestions, ideas around the issues that they face. And it's designed to draw out what issues really matter to children and young people, what changes they want to see, and how we can work with them rather than to them, doing stuff to them to advocate for them moving forward and to support them in what is, as I said before, very complex online environments and ecosystems too. It's now celebrated with a variety of activities. So every single year, the UK Safer Internet Centre produces a whole raft of different resources. This year, along with the usual assembly packs and teacher packs and lesson packs for each of the key stages. We have events in all 4 nations. We also have a video wall where children and young people can contribute and offer their own ideas and suggestions. And after a process of moderation, that will be put up online so people can see what other young people are saying as well, as part of the day and part of the event. If you want more information about it, Safer Internet or saferinternetday.org.uk. Both of those addresses will take you to those resources. And also too, if you want to be a partner, so any organisation can partner and support Safer Internet Day, go and register your details on those at those web addresses, and upload your logo and your Safer Internet Day statement and ID, and that will scroll through the day through all of those activities. So you can register yourself as a partner and take a positive step towards celebrating Safer Internet Day too.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much for setting the scene for us there, Ken. It's been something which has been set around for a long time, and like you said, every day is a Safer Internet Day, but yeah, having that spotlight, it really does help sort of shine a light on it. And I think, you know, it's been such a fantastic point to hang upon thinking around Safer Internet for such a very long time. Tracy, you've been involved in working with Ken at ProjectEVOLVE. And ProjectEVOLVE is a resource, you didn't mention it, Ken, but ProjectEVOLVE is an absolutely fantastic resource in so many ways, where you can log on. It's free for schools to use, and once you're in there, you can really dive in and access resources that are tailored to your curriculum and how they can fit across multiple strands of different subject areas and so forth and so on. Tracy, as well as your work in helping creating the resources for ProjectEVOLVE, you also run the i-vengers. And I was thinking about a news piece that you were involved with the BBC recently. The themes of Safer Internet, let's say, previously we've had Together for a Better Internet. We're talking about being safe online this year. What approaches do you advocate for when you're working with students?
Well, interestingly, it's funny that looking at the topic for this year's Safer Internet Day, which is want to talk about it, and as part of the i-vengers programme, we ran a survey, and we had responses from 12,000 children, young people, and 2,000 parents. And we asked them roughly the same questions, and we wanted to compare and contrast what parents think versus what children are actually telling us. One of the questions that we asked is, have you ever been approached by someone that you don't know online? So really quite a generic question, one that you would probably find in most online safety surveys. And of the 12,000 students that came back, 39% of them said yes, they'd been approached by someone that they don't know online. It doesn't mean that they were talking to a weirdo, or they could be gaming against other children and young people. But as we know, we don't actually know whether they're actually children or young people, so it all gets a bit messy. So that was 39% of children said that yes, they've been approached by someone that they don't know. When we asked parents, only 9% of parents said, yes, my child has been approached by someone that they don't know online. And this was reflected in so many of the questions that we asked, where children were saying, yes, this happens, and parents were saying, no, it doesn't. So actually, we want children to talk about it, but at the moment, children aren't talking about it. So for me, the theme this year is absolutely on point. It's definitely something we need to encourage. So with the i-vengers programme, for me, it's about listening to the voice of the child and young person. We put them at the heart of everything that we do. They lead our programme. And by taking a non-judgmental approach, by listening to what they've got to say, helping and supporting, actually we find that we get a lot more information from them. Once we've got that information, so as a result of the surveys, I collate all the information and send it back to the schools, and always refer them to ProjectEVOLVE and say, you might want to do some more work in the classroom, and if you look at ProjectEVOLVE, this particular strand would work for you. So for me, it's about it's listening to the voice of the child. It is just so incredibly important, and also listening to the voice of parents as well. And sharing information with parents. With the i-vengers programme, we set one task every half term, and every task that we set links with home. So we're educating parents, because we know that schools are doing some great work that's not always replicated at home. So the idea of the i-vengers programme is that we kind of like fill that gap a little bit. So yeah, for me, one of the most important things is most definitely listening to the voice of the child. Understanding their knowledge, where are they, rather than us as adults thinking, this is what children know, this is what children are doing. listening to their knowledge and build on that and use some of the amazing resources out there. I mean, Project Evolve is fantastic. It's free, cost schools absolutely nothing. And the resources are, I mean, I know that I'm a bit biased, but even the ones that didn't write, they're amazing, especially the ones I didn't write. I'm proud of what I did on there. It was good. But yeah, it's putting children at the heart of the decisions that we're making and the education that we're giving them, rather than basing that on what we think. We absolutely need to turn that spotlight on children, and we need to encourage them to talk to others. Now, one of the things that we've noticed in schools is, because we know that children aren't talking to parents, and we did do some follow-up work about this, and we asked, why aren't you telling your parents? And they always came back with the same things. We'll get into trouble. Even if it's for something that someone's done to us, we'll still get into trouble and we'll have our devices taken away. So children aren't sharing because they're worried about, in particular, these two things. But if they're not talking to parents, then they need to talk to someone. So if in schools we can provide that non-judgmental, that supportive space for them, and encourage them to talk about what they're doing online, encourage them to talk about the issues that they're facing, then we're a better place to help support and educate them.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Tracy. I can see the other panelists nodding their head as well. The student voice is important, regardless of whether it's about online safety or how they get on with their learning, to all sorts of things. And perception versus reality, is whilst you might believe X, Y, or Z, actually having the information and the statistics there is really useful. The activity you describe about sort of surveying parents and students separately and then comparing and contrasting the results has always been a really useful activity, that particularly for parents to learn, actually, this is the reality versus what you actually believe and think. And that then starts to open up that conversation, doesn't it? About those differences. Emma, can I just jump to you a second? Your work at the Internet Watch Foundation, I don't envy your work there. It's certainly not an easy role. And if you wanted to touch on your response about the work that you do, for those who don't know what the Internet Watch Foundation does. But again, reality versus perception. People might think that there aren't any problems, actually, but we know full well that there are. So given the work that you do at the IDF, could you share some of the trends that you're seeing that might be of interest to our viewers to help them best know what to educate students upon? Tracy's touched upon some things from her research there. What are you seeing, Emma?
Thank you very much. So before I launch into the work of the IWF, I want to say that we fully, wholeheartedly believe the internet is an absolutely wonderful and fabulous tool, particularly around the education space. But the niche, the area of work that the Internet Watch Foundation does, is that we identify images and videos that show the sexual abuse of children, and then we work globally through a network of partners to get those removed. And as part of that work, we collate huge amounts of intelligence and data that we create services from, and then those services go out under a strict license to some of the world's biggest and smallest technology companies in order to prevent the upload, the recirculation and the storage of these images. And the work doesn't stop. I have to say that it's only got bigger and bigger over the years. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Yes, we've grown as an organization, and every time we grow, we find more of this content, but we also believe more is being produced. And I guess that takes me to the first point, which is the changing nature of child sexual abuse material online and how it's actually created. Years ago, it would have, we're seeing content that's been created where the abuser is physically present in the room with the victim, with the child. But that has completely changed now. Most of the material that we're seeing online is where someone has groomed, coerced, accessed, encouraged children via a webcam, like I'm talking to you now, that via some kind of internet connected device that the abuser has and that the child has. To paint the picture for you, the child is typically alone in their bedroom. Most often it's their bedroom, sometimes it's a bathroom. Sometimes there will be more than one children, but mostly we see the child is alone. Crucially, there's no supervision around. There's no kind of like parent type figure. And that child is talking to either one or many people on the other side of the webcam. We see videos of this and we see the child's side of it. So we don't know what the children are being asked always, but when they're voicing, sometimes they read out questions that they're reading on the screen. So they'll be down here like this, reading the question. They'll be clarifying what it is that they've been asked and perhaps repeating some of that question. And then they'll be doing what it is that they've been instructed to do. And it is absolutely heartbreaking because these are children. Typically, we see children aged 11 to 13 years old. That's the biggest group that we see. However, and this is the one to note for educators, the fastest growing group are children aged 7 to 10 years old. And I went for a wonderful visit to see Ken a few months ago, and I was introduced to ProjectEVOLVE, and I was put through my paces as if I was a year 10 student, which was quite scary. ProjectEVOLVE is amazing. And Ken said something to me that is absolutely stuck with me ever since. He said, well, if children aged 7 to 10 years old are falling victim to this type of sexual abuse, then the education about that particular threat to them online has to start earlier than that. It's no good waiting until children 10 years old to start to talk to them or build in that resilience. And it's about building resilience. So we've been tracking this as a theme for many years. I mean, we started, I think we were the first organization in the world, someone correct me if I'm wrong, in 2012 to just literally count the number of images online that we could find that were of a sexting nature. And that was at the time when the word sexting hadn't even really been invented and wasn't widely used. And we've done subsequent studies over the years. Now, 3/4 of everything we see online is created via the way that I've just described, where someone has accessed that child via an internet connected device. And what we see very often is a lot of victim blaming, that it's the child's fault. They should have actually been more, more aware of the tactics of offenders who are much older than them, let's just say, and taking advantage and manipulating these children. And we also see a lot of parent blaming as well, which is no good either. So I absolutely love the theme of Safer Internet Day because it is about having those really important conversations between parents and teachers, parents and carers and the children that they're responsible for. That's the key one. Good quality conversations in the family home, we found in our research, are a really good way to help protect those children. And so that the children know it's a safe space that they can talk to their parents about these things. If somebody is trying to access them online and they are trying to encourage them into these types of activities which are being recorded, and unfortunately, when we find them, they're being shared multiple times across multiple websites, which are set up on the internet for people with a sexual interest in children. And on top of that, it's being commercialized as well. So this content of children is being sold around the world. It's horrendous. And I've painted a really dreadful picture. But when you think about what you could do as a parent or a carer, or if there's a child in your life that you're responsible for, having those conversations really early on to help build resilience in that child is just so important and can make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely, Emma. Thank you for sharing that, and the trends and the things that you're seeing is always equally, in equal sort of measure, interesting and horrifying whenever I get the chance to speak to you or other colleagues at the IWF. But thank you for sharing that. I wanted to open the floor up to others, but perhaps give time Al or Jerome. I think, Al, you got your finger up there. Anything cropped up that surprised you, or are you seeing similar trends yourself, Al?
I think it's really interesting. I have to avoid trying to be too much of a fanboy here, but I huge respect to Ken and the team and the resources they do. We've worked with Tracy for a long time, and I love the i-vengers program. And you wouldn't be shocked to hear wearing my business hat, we're members and partners with the IWF as well. So for me, it's like all these trusted voices all in one place. I think the thing that just resonated in sort of that end comment from Emma kind of came across was kind of in two parts. You know, within our MAT, we have infant schools, we have primary schools, we have secondary schools, and we have all through schools. So we cover that gamut. And there absolutely is a growing kind of move to the younger and younger age group where there are concerns. But one of the few positives of the last 2 years, pandemic-wise, was that in many ways we increased and improved our parental communication digitally, and both parents and community. And I think there is a growing recognition that many of our parents are extremely naive and poorly informed on some of the risks and challenges. And I know there's great work being done, but I think it may have been assumed that parents had a tighter grip. Tracy's stats really reinforce that in terms of that gap between student and parent experience. And then just flipping from another thing, I have a role at a weekend as a counsellor online, and seeing the impact on young people's mental health related more and more to digital encounters and experiences, whether it's bullying, abuse, and so on. Again, the age range seems to be gradually drifting downwards. So I think there is, it resonates with all these reasons, and what better to focus on than actually trying to amplify the student voice and get them to actually talk about their experiences.
Yeah, Ken, you got your hand up. Do you want to try and jump
Yeah,
in,
I
Ken?
just wanted to quickly respond to. I mean, it's worth repeating the work. We've partnered with the IWF for a very long period of time, and the work that they do is absolutely imperative for keeping children safe. And the fact that it's difficult to stumble across these images by accident actually online is a testimony to the work that the IWF do. People generally have to jump fences to get to this content thanks to the work that they do. So it's worth repeating. It's a real frontline service, and as you said, Mark, really the dirty end of a very difficult issue online. Emma, it'd be really good to talk about where I'd love you just to talk about some of the stuff that came up recently about where you mentioned 11 to 13-year-old girls particularly, and around not necessarily just content that's being coerced, but self-generated images of children within that age group. That's quite a uniquely vulnerable group, isn't it? And specifically 11 to 13-year-old girls is really specific.
Yeah, so when we see content created in this way, and I'm really trying to avoid using the term self-generated content because it almost suggests that in those cases of exploitation and grooming and coercion, that the child was knowingly and happily having in this experience. But in this imagery that's created in this way, that we see being shared online, even if it was consensually taken in the first place, let's just say, particularly for that upper teen group, we find it on websites where it's then been onwardly unconsensually shared because it's in places that people are purchasing it and trading it for some kind of sexual gratification. And that 11 to 13 age group has stuck around for a long time, and it is particularly girls, although there's a little bit of an exception coming on the horizon if I can venture down that avenue as well. So I have to say 99% of the self-generated content that we have seen with 11 to 13-year-olds is girls. So 99%, 1% of it is of boys. And that's an important point to remember, particularly, again, for parents with their daughters, a conversation to have around that. And the thing with boys, though, is that we have partnered with Childline and SPCC and launched, about 18 months ago now, it was launched, a service called Report Remove, which empowers young people to self-report any sexual imagery that they might have. And I won't go into too much detail about all the brilliant things that this means for young people and how the system works. But what we are seeing very clearly through that is that it's being utilized more heavily by boys, which is in an absolute contrast to the imagery that we're finding out and about being traded on the internet. So there are interesting trends. So when we empower young people to use a service like Report Remove, boys are using it more than girls, which is a point worth stating, and actually boys in that upper teen group as well. And I think that then links back to the tactics being used by offenders and how young people are being caught up and duped into this kind of into the conversations online and who's targeting them. So tactics of offenders are really, really important. And actually, I think that's a point that parents should be made more aware of, just to help them understand why their child is so vulnerable, so that we know offenders, for example, will scattergun requests across the internet to all sorts of children, and all they need is one or two to reply. That's all it takes. Also, if you think about, and if you were ever a young girl yourself, or even a young person, you know, a boy might be able to resonate with this. Something that it really speaks to you being beautiful and pretty and all these things that you feel like you long to be when you're at that really vulnerable age group of 11 to 13s. They're being told that by these offenders. They're sort of reinforcing this. It becomes this almost intoxicating thing. Someone loves me. Someone really is listening to me, cares about me. That and also the idea of games. Every child loves a game. Lots of children love to show off gymnastic skills. Do a handstand. Don't wear any pants. You can see how it can go. It can just feel to a child really harmless and just good fun. But actually, there's a more sinister motive there. I know I've just packed a whole load of stuff and I've gone all over the place with that response. But if any of this helps to resonate within someone's mind what the vulnerability of children are, the vulnerabilities are, that the children aren't to blame, and that the tactics of offenders, that's what you are up against. So have those conversations in the home.
Brilliant, thank you, Emma. Tom, I'll come to you in a second, Tracy. Tom, you had your hand up before. Now, before I jump across, pants in America is something different to what it is here in the UK. Okay, so
Yeah.
when Emma mentions pants, that's underwear here rather than trousers, as you would know. But what did you want to add to the conversation, Tom?
Just wanted to piggyback on that. Anecdotally, and also with some recent data from the United States. But anecdotally, or even in my own personal life, my wife and I have 4 kids. We have a 16-year-old daughter, a 14-year-old son, and we have twin daughters that are 12 in the same age group we're talking about here. And we're some of those terrible, mean parents who don't give them a smartphone until they're 13. So sorry about that. But my daughters desperately want that. And it's just anecdotally, they've desired that more than our son did. And because in their social circles, everybody already has a phone. And now I'm not anti-internet. Our kids are on, Facebook Kids Messenger, and they can use our phones, and then we have iPads and all of that stuff. They have their own laptops. So they can communicate with their friends, and they do a lot. But in the United States, we've seen a huge increase in mental health issues with particularly young ladies in that same age group, actually 12 to 17. So in the United States, there's a group called the Centers for Disease Control. It's the biggest government agency that is a watchdog on what's happening with mental health and behavioral health. And so they monitor things like, why do people go to the emergency room? Well, one of the things that they look at is who's going to the emergency room and why. And so in the first year of the pandemic, so from March of 2020, which was right when everything shut down, that first calendar year, for young ladies ages 12 to 17, the CDC recorded a 51% increase in emergency room visits to the hospital for attempted suicide of young ladies. And interestingly, you say, well, what was it for young men? It was actually only 3%. Now that's the kind of percentage you might expect to see year to year, maybe an ebb and flow of 2 or 3% here or there. And so what we're seeing is girls are spending more time online through social media. Guys are spending more time online through gaming. If you even zoom out bigger picture, I talk a lot about bullying, as I mentioned earlier. Guys are more apt to bully in a physical sense, where young women are more apt to bully through a social sense. So the pressure that is on our young women is immense. And I'm a big proponent of equipping parents and families to, as we talked earlier, to build resilience into our kids so that as we give them these devices, they feel more equipped. And, it's like this. This is my house. My kids are under my roof. And so it's my job and my wife's job to protect them while they're under that roof. And I think that's one of the biggest problems I see here in the United States is year by year by year, kids are getting fully unlocked phones given to them. The parents, it's hard to keep up with it, right? So how do we, we'll just give it to them and just hope for the best. And it is hard to keep up with, but there are tools, whether you use Android or iOS, Apple devices, there's tools for families. that are free that you can use and should use as parents, especially when they're getting those devices.
And I completely agree. As a parent myself, I regularly get requests for more time on TikTok and other platforms that my children are desperate to spend more time on. As I completely concur. Really interesting statistics there as well, which highlight those differences between the two sort of spaces for males and females as well, Tom. Thank you very much for sharing those. Tracy, you had your hand up just before Tom spoke then. Do you want to add your
I did,
thoughts
yeah.
as well?
So, yeah, and it's around the ages of education. So obviously the stats that Emma has shared with us, you know, that they are eye-opening. I think anyone that works in this arena in schools will notice that the ages are getting younger and younger. When I did the i-vengers programme, when it was first funded 2 years ago by the Police and Crime Commissioner for Derbyshire, and it was because we were seeing such a huge rise of nude and semi-nude images at secondary. And we wanted to do something that would educate primary age children. So the funding that I was given was just to work with years 5 and 6, so 10 and 11-year-olds, 9, 10 and 11-year-olds. They've just refunded me or funded me again for a further 2 years. And this time we've insisted on changing those goalposts. So we're now working with years 3, 4, 5 and 6. So from children age 7 to 11. And for me, the hardest part, absolutely, it is so essential. I've just finished doing 10 months on the harmful sexual behaviour support service as well, where we saw a disproportionate number of young girls who were the victim of harmful sexual behaviour. So we see it all kind of mingles in together, but it's how do we educate in an effective way without alienating and scaring parents? Because when we start to talk about these things, parents get really, they get a bit twitchy, they get a little bit uncomfortable. So the way that we teach it has to be really careful. And I kind of feel like we're giving it a bit of a soft touch. But I don't know. I don't think there's an answer, and I don't expect anyone to come back with an answer. But we definitely need to do more at a younger age, and it needs to be an acceptable part of the curriculum.
No, I completely agree. I think that's a useful segue, actually, Tracy, to bring in Jerome, because as the sort of person on the panel who is still an active educator working in school with children every day and beyond the school hours as well, aren't you, Jerome? Because it's a boarding school in which you work.
Yes, correct. Yes. And we're prep school also, which it's bang on the age group. That's the reason why I put my hand up. We are 7 to 13 here. So we really bang on the age group mentioned by Emma, which is very, very scary. The things I've been hearing this morning. Obviously, you're aware of things, but not like that. And so this is where we, as teachers, and here I lead the digital learning, we have to make sure that we educate the children. Obviously, the IT teacher does a fantastic job there. I had my picture of Saul there. We're doing assemblies. We're going to do a great assembly on Tuesday, 7th, for digital well-being and gaming and things like that. But we also have to educate the parents, and that's the reason why also we have the parents coming in for little chats here and there, and it's very important they should know what's happening. And this talk has to be done, isn't it? Even if it feels very uncomfortable, they have to know what's happening, because some people are totally oblivious. They give a mobile phone to very young pupils, or they allow them to go on the internet at all times when they go home, which is fine. Obviously, we have borders. Everything is controlled really well here as boarding school, because they're not allowed to be going on devices in the evening and stuff. But so they don't have access to mobile phones or anything. So it's all very well controlled in that respect. So we're worried a bit more about the children when they go home, obviously, on exit weekends, or when they have the weekends, or when they go on holidays, or when the day children go back home. So we have to make sure that, it works for everybody. But it's really scary. That scary talk is very important, and it's got to be done. And this is, I think, again, after what Emma said, I feel even more inclined to be pushing this a bit harder and to the parents and say, look, this is happening, and you really have to be careful with what you're doing with the children at home, and really look at what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I did have a really specific question for you, Jerome. If you could sort of dive deeper for me into this, if that's okay. Because you
Of
lead
course.
on digital, you lead on digital in the school. I was wondering two things really. Firstly, what are you going to be doing to celebrate Safer Internet Day? And also recognizing, as we said, that every day is a Safer Internet Day. How do you ensure your learners are kept safe when using digital tools? Have you
That's a
got any
great question.
tools that you
So
use to
as
support you with that?
Yeah, we're not going to be doing anything special. I'm going to have the spot on assembly. We have assembly about 3 or 4 times a week. I'm going to be chatting about digital well-being, gaming, and things like that for on the day mentioned, the 7th of February, Safe Internet Day. And on a day-to-day basis, we have a very solid filter at school to make sure that when the children, they are the year 7 and year 8. Now we've got their own device, a one-to-one device, and we make sure we have a solid filter. But also we are using Classroom Cloud, which is a fantastic tool. I've been very, very impressed with the use of Classroom Cloud. So we can see exactly what the children are doing in class and what things they're accessing, and if they're hiding some kind of a YouTube video and whilst we're teaching something, you can see that straight away. Now it's a very clever tool. We also use the safeguarding thing also on that too, which is great. And the day, a funny thing which happened, the day I was like trialing this, the safeguarding thing, and I saw a lot of alerts and alarms saying, looking for weapons, and a lot of weapons was happening. And it just happens that the headmaster himself was actually doing a Latin lesson on gladiators. So no wonder why all that. So it's kind of a filter which is very sensitive but very, very useful. I picked up on quite a few things on that, and this term when we started using is very, very useful. But we also have a very safe routine too. The children they're not allowed to be using their devices in break times. They put them back to charge up. In lunch times, it's the same thing. And so they have access in class, but not after class. So it's always watched what they're doing. And I think that's really important. But these tools, this extra tool like Classroom Cloud and the safeguarding option and the solid filter is very, very useful and very important to have. So we know that they're doing the right things also.
Yeah, it's really important, I think, and this is a message I remember you sort of sharing back along when you were talking in my school, Ken. It's not about going and blocking absolutely everything. It's about providing them the opportunities to use all these tools, but shepherd them in a way that allows them to have the freedoms to better sort of search things they need to search for, and use the Emma, you mentioned what a fantastic resource the internet actually is, and of course it absolutely is. But some of the things that Jerome's mentioning there, the use of a good filter and then tools to sort of track and monitor what children are using is super important, isn't it, Ken?
Oh yeah, completely. And so over the years, we've seen appropriate filtering monitoring as a phrase being folded into keeping children safe in education, the statutory guidance for schools from the DFE, and on the Safer Internet UK Safer Internet Centre website, there's some very detailed guidance for schools around what filtering and monitoring and what appropriate filtering and monitoring looks like. It's worth bearing in mind we've just been working recently with the DFE to further define those standards into something a little bit more meaningful in terms of a set of standards around filtering and monitoring. So I quite anticipate that will be released soon from the DFE, and at some point I think may very well find its way into keeping children safe, because I think appropriate's a really difficult thing, isn't it? If you're developing standards, the word appropriate, what's appropriate for you, depending on your size, your technical estate, the way you use it, the age group that you're working with. So yeah, I would anticipate that they would become a little bit more granular, a little bit more focused over the next 12 months and become part of a little bit more statutory advice and guidance from government.
Brilliant stuff, Ken. And that's a really lovely little segue to my next question for you, Al, which is about context. As you know, Al, and so you mentioned there, Ken, about the appropriateness and what is appropriate for one setting might be different for another. Context is absolutely paramount. Could you explain, Al, perhaps in your trust, what sort of context is considered as part of how you safeguard children's activities online, so that they, a bit like Jerome was sort of talking about, so they have the freedom to explore whilst being protected at the same time. What sort of approaches, given that sort of appropriateness and context, how do you go about doing that in your trust?
Yeah, absolutely. Can try and unpick a little bit. I absolutely sign up to that appropriate word, particularly when you've got schools across the trust with different age groups and cohorts. There's a natural persuasion for me, with half my time being in the edtech space, to say that, well, it's all around the digital, of course. Well, in truth, that's the secondary bit. So, we do use tools. You'll be shocked to hear that we use Classroom Cloud and NetSupport DNA for our filtering. And context is one where it's always a black and white. Jerome gave the example there of somebody searching about a weapon, but in reality, something that a teacher would do with their eyes and ears in milliseconds, technology looks at ways to say, well, was that on an online chat portal, or was it on PowerPoint? There's a distinction there in terms of risk. Was it something that, as a similar topic, a child has searched for repeatedly? Was it in a lesson, or was it in an unsupervised library period, and so on? So there's lots of context that wraps around creating risk. But I'd argue in many cases we try and work more on the intelligence. What are the trending topics that hopefully feed into the stuff which is more powerful, which is actually empowering our learners, the digital citizenship, empowering them to make the right choices, to think about how they can validate the authenticity of information, and of course think about their footprint. I think the other bit we've worked on and recognized is actually it's an ever-changing landscape, and that, thank goodness for the work of IWF and others in terms of always trying to keep that up to date. But I think there's also a mindset that we recognize that we start the questioning from very much the top down. So from a trust board and governance level, really asking the core questions about, how do we know that our children feel safe in our schools? How are we actually measuring that rather than assumption? And there's lots of questions that we would drill down around that. There's been quite a lot of focus in terms of context about actually empowering staff. Again, we know that everybody within the school has got an understanding of, as Ken's referenced, Kingsley and safeguarding procedures, but are our policies actually that accessible? Are they being read? But more importantly, when there's constantly changing risks and topics, particular trending items, do we assume that our staff are suitably informed for how to identify and unpick that? Or are we going the extra mile to make sure that we're not just thinking about our children, but we're thinking about our staff, and we're appropriate parents in terms of insights on that? So I think context is always about that. So that decision you make as an educator in a physical safeguarding sense, you recognize a child, and if you have signs that might want you to pose some kind of report of risk, you're looking at a number of factors. So we try and supplement that digitally to empower the right qualified person to make the ultimate decisions. The one thing I would say, which I think has become greater prevalence, and thank goodness so, perhaps ties as well into this year's message, is about actually the accessibility for young people to report their concerns. And that obviously has been amplified when we think about the peer-on-peer abuse online and others, but actually looking at the ways that technology, alongside staff being accessible, can empower young people to actually report concerns, either that have been directed towards themselves or from their peers. And I think that trying to find pathways of accessibility and transparency, sometimes it's not your form tutor as a different teacher that a child will feel safe sharing and talking about. So it's a bit interwoven. I don't for any minute pretend that what we do in our trust is somehow an exemplar, but I think it's actually the most important thing is recognizing no matter what you do, next week it won't be enough. You've always got to be revisiting and looking at it and make sure that everybody at every level of the trust sees that as a priority conversation at some point in each meeting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Al. Thank you very much for sharing that. I wanted to, if that's okay, Tom, jump to you for a second. I was just reflecting back upon what you were saying before about the differences between sort of boys and girls and these sort of things, and your experiences with your own children. And you say you work with, was it how many thousands of not just schools but students in the work that you do now? Online disinhibition is something which has always really interested me, because the fact that we hear sort of terms as adults like keyboard warriors, don't we? Right, people who will say things whilst they're online that they would never dream of saying to somebody in real life, face to face, and with children trying to navigate these sort of social spaces and wanting to. Tracy was talking before about, or it might have been Emma actually, mentioning wanting to feel pretty or wanting to feel part of a social space, for being able to sort of fit in within society and things. All these things can have a big impact on young people. And when they've got a device, there's a portal into them 24/7, 365. As adults, we can try and shepherd them by with things like screen time before, and how long children get to be able to access certain tools during the course of a day, so forth and so on. But this can have this constant. And we've seen research before about how sort of dopamine levels can rise when notifications ping on your devices and all these sort of things. But all of these things can have a real negative impact on your mental health of children, not just children, but adults as well. I was wondering if you could share some sort of ways to, as parents, we can help our young people self-regulate by using some of these parental tools. But have you got any tips that you could share for young people to try and sort of self-regulate themselves, particularly when things start to go wrong for young people?
Yeah, no, it's a big topic. The interesting thing is we often are expecting this high level of behavior that maybe we as adults aren't modeling so well ourselves, such as device use and having that impulse control on our own. So the first place to start is modeling. It's parents at home, and parents need to be the parents. It's interesting here in the United States, if you want to go hunting deer, which is something I wanted to do when I was a kid, I thought I want to go along with my dad to go hunting. Well, I had to take a class called hunter's safety, because if you are going to hold a device that could harm life, you had to go take this 2-day class and pass it, and then you could go hunt. And we don't have anything like that with phones yet. Not that we necessarily should have something that universal, but it's an interesting concept that we're saying, here's your fully unlocked device. We don't know how to keep up with it, so good luck. And that's the approach that some parents take. So it's sort of like a non-approach, that there aren't necessarily rules that they could impose, or they'd like their kid to be safe online, but they just don't know how to do it and where to start. And you mentioned the idea of like shepherding, as a shepherd protects these vulnerable sheep from the wolves trying to attack. And so during the pandemic, there's a group of educators here in the United States that we started a nonprofit group called Reset Schools. We wanted to give schools these training tools to help kids learn how to reset when they're feeling anxious and stressed out, or when they might have that lack of impulse control. And when we were setting all that up, we said, there's a big blind spot we miss in the education space, which is number one, it's a disconnect between the schools and the parents. So we call that, at least here in the US, it's called parental engagement. And the older a kid gets, this seems to be the less and less engagement there is. But what we looked at is right now, again, I speak to United States. I know you're in, most of our audience here is in the UK. But in the United States, about 10% of a school population, only about 10% of the kids ever access mental health care within the school system. So they have what's called an IEP, an individualized education plan, and they might then meet with a school counselor or a school psychologist, which, by the way, they're understaffed, right? So it's about 1,400 students to one school psychologist, which means each school psychologist is often in multiple schools just to keep up. And then they really can't keep up. They're only dealing with sort of the most severe cases. School counselors, it's almost 500 to 1, students to the school counselors in the United States. Obviously not enough to keep up with the students. So we said, what can we do to look at a way to reach all of the kids? Because this is really a mental health issue, which is part of your total health, is how do you respond when you feel threatened? How do you respond when you feel manipulated or controlled or bullied or coerced? And how do you live a healthy life? And we had this big aha moment, which was, here we are trying to educate kids' brains, but here in the US, we don't actually proactively teach mental health in schools. So 4 of us developed a resource called Mental Health 101 for Teens. It's a book you can look up, and I hope you will, on Amazon. Read the reviews from parents and educators. But we put together a book, and then we put together a teacher's guide with these family discussion sheets. So, our goal is to see mental health be treated not just as something that we want to, prevent. Mental health is something we want to build, because we all have mental health, right? So we want to build it in a positive way into students, so that when these situations come up, be them in person or online, they're given tools for how they can handle that type of situation. So as we've done that, we've seen some schools adopt it and use that as part of their curriculum, which is really cool. Imagine you're a kid who in the US, I'm one of those kids who has to see the school counselor. So there's a built-in stigma if you're kind of labeled as, you have to go see the school counselor. So now, maybe that plays into my reputation. But we want to kind of flip the script and say, mental health is something we can teach all kids at very young ages. And it's something, these are strengths we can build into kids, just as we have, let's say, physical education class or gym class. We would also have a mental health class. And what we see is when kids get more mentally strong and resilient, their academics improve and their social life improves. And so if we can give those tools to schools and parents at younger ages, we see really positive results.
It's an interesting sort of analogy. You particularly this time of year, actually, Tom, you see a lot of people sort of sign up for gym memberships for their physical health, but we don't see so many people sort of signing up for sort of mental health support and getting those sort of memberships.
Well, it's totally, and it's such a good metaphor, because when you think about your physical health, you have things you do to prevent disease, or if you get sick, you go to the doctor. But then you also, if you're really healthy, you're going to go to the gym. And so you're not just preventing a negative, you're promoting a positive in your life. And that's a big blind spot in schools, and they're not sure how to teach it. Even in the US, sometimes it's seen as controversial, because some of the programs that are out there might have a political bent to it, or maybe a religious bent, or it's touchy, right? Because you skirt on the edge of teaching morality, but it's really universal morality to treat everyone with respect, to stay cool under the collar when people are getting maybe aggressive, how to stay under control even if someone else goes out of control. And so I don't see how we can expect these kids to have a balanced life when we know many of them are coming from unsupportive homes. And there's a word that gets thrown around, the word of privilege. And to me, I think the biggest privilege you have is to grow up in a supportive home. So then you've got a percentage of kids who don't have that. What are we doing for those kids? That's what I'm concerned about.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's interesting. My next question is linking across for Ken and Tracy about ProjectEVOLVE. I'm wondering about how we can sort of segue between Tom's points about mental health learning and the learning that's available on the ProjectEVOLVE site. Are there any sort of similar themes, Ken and Tracy, around the things that Tom's advocating for here, available for schools on ProjectEVOLVE?
Oh, Tracy, I hope you don't mind, but very much so in the data that we see coming out from ProjectEVOLVE, it's mainly so currently at the moment, for those of you who don't know, ProjectEVOLVE is not only a sort of suite of resources mapped to a competency framework that's generally been accepted as the de facto standard certainly across England. It also has a way of being able to identify and measure need and capability as well within the tool. And so there's 2 different data sets. Currently it's used by 47,000 teachers and 12,300 schools. The assessment components of it, which we call the knowledge map sections, have had 790,000 separate assessments. So we've built up quite a unique and granular and detailed view around what children know and where need is, not only what they know and what they don't know, but where the gaps are, where there's wrong acquisition of concepts, where there's secure reflective understanding, where there's emerging and developing understanding. So quite detailed information. But what Tom was talking about before was this idea of amongst all of this, very many of the strands within Project Evolve are social and emotionally learning focused. So things like online relationships, self-image and identity, online reputation, health, well-being and lifestyle. These are rooted in some of the traditional SEL components that we've had, that have flirted with and been in and out of UK education over the years as well. And the data suggests to us that actually schools are focusing on those components rather than the ones that are technically led or led around technology, like privacy and security, copyright and ownership. Actually, the vast majority are focusing on things like self-image and identity, online bullying, online relationships. And it also gives us a sneak peek and a doorway into how schools are dovetailing some of this thing, some of these issues that we've always thought of being connected with technology and computing into the other areas of the curriculum, like PHSE, SRE. So, and so we've responded to that in Project Evolve by actually identifying all the digital components within other areas of the curriculum that these resources can sit. So if you're a literacy lead or a PHSE lead or indeed a humanities lead, you can go and find resources to address those digital pillars of your particular curriculum area. Because if you think about it, things like if you're a literacy lead within a school, an English lead, a language lead, you're going to be talking about misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, hoax, parody, fact, opinion, all of those things. And Project Evolve, we think, can cater for those, particularly where those sort of things emanate online. So the stuff that Tom has said has really, resonated with us, because we have seen that's where the majority of schools are focusing, in weaving these things in that ostensibly look like a technology related thing into those other areas of the curriculum where they can identify those needs.
Yeah, schools, obviously, Ken is the all-seeing Project Evolve person. I'm just a mere content writer. So I obviously don't get the feedback and the data that Ken has access to, but my experience is and I work predominantly with primary schools. Not entirely sure why that is, but that's kind of like my bag. And it's all very much social and emotional. So yeah, online relationships, the bullying strands. Yeah, that's where I'm seeing schools. And I think as well, it depends on who takes the lead, as Ken kind of alluded to. Who takes the lead in online safety in the school can also have a really big impact on which of those strands are utilised most in school.
Yeah. The data we're also getting out of the back end of the tool as well supports the stuff Emma and I have met and discussed this. We can see areas around things like consent, around self-image, about identity, about in relationships. We can see gaps in children's understanding running up to those age groups that Emma identified, where those sort of things, particularly around consent and self-image and body image, are so important to discuss at a very fundamental and building block levels. Our data supports that there is a requirement and a need for those things to be addressed beyond just the generic online safety focuses that we've had in the past about don't, stop, block and all of those things too. So all of these things that we're talking about now, as we begin to build and develop this landscape into something that has real rigor around it and is evidence-based, is becoming much more important that we dip into these different pools of evidence to support how we engage with children on this.
Tell you about a trend that is happening here in the United States, which there is a push right now by a certain group of politicians to remove all social and emotional learning from schools. Now, you'd think, well, why would we do that? And it really the reason behind it is they're saying, okay, we don't want kids to be indoctrinated in some type of a political view that we might disagree with. We don't, all of these programs, they're all political. So they kind of paint with a broad brush and saying that these programs have an agenda, which most of them don't, but some of them do. And so what they've said, and people are going, they're racking their brains, why would you take that out of schools? This helps kids to be more at ease in their own skin and calm under pressure, have less anxiety, and learn how to deal with that anxiety when it comes. That's what social and emotional learning actually is supposed to teach, makes you a better human. So why wouldn't you do that? And what they're saying is, oh, that's supposed to be at home. That's not supposed to be part of public education. It's just reading, writing, arithmetic, history, the traditional subjects. And that's all fine and dandy in a sort of a make-believe world where everybody has two loving parents and everybody's parents are perfect, like me and my wife. We're so, are you kidding me? We all try our best, but even in a supportive home, a kid needs other adults in their life, particularly trusting adults like teachers, showing and modeling and teaching, the type of social emotional learning skills that we're talking about, because they're going to be, as they learn those skills, they're going to be relevant, not just, on a phone, but in real life. And we've seen through the pandemic that the line between our digital life and our quote unquote real life has been just more and more blurred. So you're going to need those skills your entire life. And I think if we start to take them out of the schools, we're doing a huge disservice to kids who come from unsupportive homes or at-risk homes.
Yeah, I completely agree there, Tom, and thank you for being so brave as to say, what you said about your own parenting. I won't ask other panelists to do the same, but I'll put my hand up and say, many of you know me well. I do the best I can with my children, but crikey, I really want my children's school to be helping my children as well as the support that myself and my boy's mum can give to our children. Kids have got pressures coming left, right, and centre 24/7, 365, and the more people in their lives who can A, be positive role models, and B, provide them with support when they need it, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So great point there, Tom. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to jump across, Al, if I could, because you've shared some points, Al, with your sort of trust hat on, but you're also the chair of the CEO, of a long-standing 30+ years edtech company. It's very successful. You've got obviously a vested interest in people wanting to use technology, but you support lots of other edtech companies beyond NetSupport. You're involved with BESA, the British Educational Suppliers Association. You support other edtech companies with advice when they ask for it, and you champion educational technology. What advice would you give to technology companies about how they can help provide and make for a better space for young people to be online? We've seen things like the Children's Code and other things coming through. What sort of advice would you give to other edtechs about being a bit more responsible?
Well, I think there's a big picture on the role that appropriate, back to Ken's point, technology can play in anybody's learning journey, supporting teaching and learning, and hopefully in many cases leveling the playing field. Ironically, much as one of the tools in our toolbox portfolio with NetSupport is around providing that digital online safeguarding and monitoring, when we hear some of the resources that are being worked on and the resources that are already there, hearing from Ken and Tracy and others, the holy grail is that there's sufficient resource and education, time and funding, so that all of our learners, we never need to worry about any online safety and filtering tools because the individual is sufficiently safe and independent themselves. So that's the direction of travel. It's about the more we can do on education. In terms of, from a vendor's perspective, the first thing I would say, and never more than the last few years, again, Ken, in wise words, reference the evidence base. Increasingly, anything in education and technology has to come from a position of evidence, whether it's pedagogically aligned, if it's a curriculum tool, or whether it's from external scrutiny when you're looking at tools that promise to deliver something. So I absolutely am a huge fan, and the reason why I work and support with lots of other edtech companies is because I think the first thing is you have to, at your heart, have a mindset of co-production. And co-production starts with not thinking you've got a great idea of making it, but actually working with the people who will be using it and constantly adapting it to be fit for purpose. And that's one of the strands that many will know with NetSupport. We're very much community-based. We create lots of resources for schools. We encourage dialogue with schools, because the truth is the more we share, the more we learn, and the learning feeds into our technology. And so I encourage all vendors to take that approach of co-production. I also think there's this huge shopping list of pressures that we have on educators and responsibilities, albeit one part of it, that first priority about keeping our children feeling safe and secure in school. But over many years, as technology's grown, there's been a bit of a technology battle. Which product's got the most buttons on the top, the most features, the most opportunities? And I think what we've actually learned in recent years is where we want technology to be effective, actually sometimes it's not about who does the most. It's about what's easiest, most intuitive, most reliable. And that it's not a transaction of here you go. It's actually about starting a long-term journey, training, support, that means that technology can be used effectively. We've got so many historical opportunities and projects we could look back on where we said the technology failed, but was it the technology or was it the people involved in the project, or were we not clear on what we were trying to achieve? More often than not, there wasn't any time for training and inset to allow people to use tools effectively or train the recipients. So I think there's some big lessons learned there, which is actually about not trying to reinvent things, but do things that we know are fit for purpose and are shaped by the educators. The final bit on that, I think, is we think within the specific realm of safeguarding, but actually it applies across all of the curriculum products. In our attempts to address a problem, we also need to be mindful that we don't create a different problem. And that's where it links into that secondary conversation about data protection and privacy. And I think there's a huge focus on, as vendors, being incumbent to be as transparent as possible in how the tool works, what data it captures. We all think about now schools having to undertake a data protection impact assessment. We think about the data processing agreements that vendors share. Some are clear and accessible. Some require a PhD in something in order to really dig deep. That creates concern, creates worry. There are many in the sector who are doing their very best to be really mindful of that. But I think we need to do more. We shouldn't put the onus on schools or education leads or IT managers to have all the answers. We should be much more transparent in how we share that information and support it. And that, of course, on a broader scale, there's work being done to look at some baselines and standards and consideration about when it comes to data privacy and processing. But that's something I'm really mindful of, because if we want to be able to embrace appropriate and credible technology to really support and accelerate what we deliver in teaching and learning, we've also got to have confidence and trust at the same time.
I completely agree with that. That's some great advice, and a few North Stars for some of our EdTech friends listening in to maybe consider for themselves as well. We're fast approaching the end of this conversation, and so much has been shared. So thank you to everybody for your insights and thoughts so far. I've got two sort of final questions to sort of wrap things up. Sort of top tip takeaways. So if you could try and limit these responses to the next few questions to being a bit shorter than some of the responses so far, that'd be great. But I think we can all agree that online safety, as Al alluded to about the importance of relationships there a few moments ago, online safety is a whole community approach. It can't just be a plaster. It's something that should be part of what we do, part of the very fabric of whole school life. What are your top tips for how schools can better include and support parents? I'll start with you, Tracy, please, if I could.
Engage with your parents. Where do we even start? So for me, for schools, it's about being open. It's about being non-judgmental. It's about being proactive in sharing, finding and sharing resources. There's some really good free stuff out there that schools can share with parents, about having those conversations, and it's about being available, I would say. I'm going to keep it really short because, wow, this one could rumble.
That's brilliant. Okay, next up, Tom, can I have your sort of top tips, please?
Well, For me, it's for the schools to find a healthy curriculum that actually has a parental engagement component in it. Of course, we built that into our Mental Health 101 program. Every chapter has a single sheet that says, here's the top 4 little points your kid learned in this chapter. Now, here are 4 or 5 discussion questions for the ride home or for the dinner table. So we see a lot of programs that are like raising the awareness of online safety, or, there's like posters and the kids get a wristband or a t-shirt. And what we're saying is send something home with the parents to get the kids actually talking with their parents, having them even role play some of these situations where their kids might be at risk or might be anxious or stressed, and then role play, what would be that appropriate response.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Jerome, can I have your top tip, please?
Yeah, I think it's super important to have the parents involved and get them in school, get them involved in that, and get also your digital leaders, if you have some digital leaders in schools and stuff, to be demonstrating to parents, even grandparents, to come into school and to show how things are working. I think that's really, really important to have everybody involved in that. But I think, you definitely have to have the information going in all directions. The children, the staff here got to be promoting be role models in what the way they approach things, but you really have to have these parents coming into school, seeing what the children do and get all the info. So that's important.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jerome. And just for clarification, digital leaders, you mean student digital leaders with that, right? As opposed to...
Yes. I think it's a kind of a junction. I think it's really important to have, you have obviously the students, but you have the NetSupport, digital leaders doing something, doing there to help, to be a beacon, also to help their friends in school. And there could be also a link with these digital leaders and also the families and coming in and stuff, demonstrating things to parents. I think that's important.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Jerome. And Emma, how about yourself? Some top tips for engaging, including...
So my top tip is going to be pretty much like everybody else. If schools can engage with their parents, then that's absolutely brilliant. And certainly at iwf.org.uk, we have run a campaign several times over now called Home Truths, which has a film on there which teachers and parents can watch that kind of lifts the veil on what is actually happening when children are being groomed and coerced in their bedrooms. And it shows that. And if you watch that and you're not moved by it, well, you will be moved by it. You need to be moved into action. The action there is have a conversation with your child, and don't just have one, have many, because we found that having that first very difficult conversation about keeping yourself safe online, particularly where grooming is concerned, and I know it's a tricky topic, it can open the door for further conversations in future, and they will get easier from now on. And do not presume that essentially any child with an internet connected device that has a camera on it could be at risk. So don't presume that, oh, they're upstairs, they're fine, or they're with their brother or sister, they're fine. They're still vulnerable. So make sure you have those conversations. And when we asked 11 to 13-year-old girls how they felt when their parents had this conversation with them, we had a huge number of surprising responses that included, I would feel proud. I would feel proud that my parents spoke to me about that. So that's the feeling that I would like parents to feel, is it proud they have the conversation, and their child will feel proud that their parent has had that conversation with them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And that's a really poignant point to make there as well. Thank you ever so much. Al, can I grab a tip from you, please?
Yeah, I'll keep it simple, given some of the other tips and questions that have already been posed. I think the most important one, if we want to continue the conversation and make sure it's the catalyst on a regular basis within our schools, is to come back to that first question at every level. Do our students feel safe and secure and protected in our schools? And how do we know? And hopefully that then feeds down to the what are we doing, whether it's from the risk of online abuse, whether it's their mental health, or all the other mixture of different challenges and topics. And it feeds into systems, processes, education and resources from that. But too often we take that reassurance that, yes, we think our students feel safe, but as Tracy has shared, there is often a disconnect between what the students feel and what the adults feel.
Brilliant stuff. And I'm gonna do 2 questions for the price of 1 here. And so you're forewarned. I'm going to go in reverse order with the next question. So the question I asked before, Ken, if you sort of top tips there, if you could share a response to that one, please. And then the final question for everybody is: what is your number 1 tool or method to help schools keep students safe online?
Right. Okay. So I know one of the hardest things is that we've all organised parent sessions, you know, where you've got lots of responses and you turn up and it's only 2 blokes and a badger, you know, and you've travelled half the length of the country to go and talk to them. So just very quickly, so number 1, the most effective thing schools can do to engage parents is drip feed this into the wider culture around the school in terms of its visibility. So, you know, sending stuff home is great, but lots of small little bits about what's happening in terms of the curriculum and communicating that back to parents, notes in school diaries, in book bags, little leaflets in book bags, on splash screens at parental portals, at events that you hold, you know, your nativity and your sports day. There should be very clear guidance in there around how you take this, and also to parents will trust your ability to be able to educate and intervene and safeguard their children if you respond as a school to incidents effectively, without the shock and awe, and parents will begin to rely on you for advice and support, and that will drive engagement. A really effective curriculum that is matched to need. That's it. And to do that, you've got to understand what those needs are. And of course, I'm going to say, aren't I, the multi-award winning ProjectEVOLVE as an example of that, but it seems to have hit the button on there. A curriculum around these areas that is relevant, is context driven, is age appropriate, and is matched to the need of the children sat in front of you. And that's very different than mapping out a whole load of stuff that you think you've got to teach. Teach the stuff that the children sat in front of you need. That will get you the better, most positive outcomes and the most pragmatic, outcomes. Because that's why we're teaching it. We want to see positive outcomes, not just to tick the box to say we've done it. And we want to be able to evidence that. So that's what I'd say.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Ken. Al, back to you.
Well, my natural response wants to be what he said, because I think very much it's absolutely about interweaving in the curriculum, and I think the ProjectEVOLVE resources are fantastic. Obviously, I'm biased and a slight disclaimer, but I genuinely have worked over the years to try and develop the right solutions. I'd love schools to check out classroom.cloud. It may be the fit for them, it may not. As we know, every school is different. There are other solutions out there too. I think the main thing is awareness and being aware of the tools that are out there. So that's what I would naturally want to put into the mix.
No worries. Brilliant stuff. Thanks, Al. And then to yourself, Emma.
Can I just say ditto what Ken said, please? When I talk to teachers at conferences about our area of what we deal with at IWF, I finish by giving a plug to ProjectEVOLVE and really encouraging them to, if they don't use it already, to get to know it and to use it. So ProjectEVOLVE for me all the way.
But I think we're going to get quite a few shout outs to ProjectEVOLVE on this final question here. I think it was Jerome next, please.
Well, again, I'm going to say Ken was absolutely spot on with his answer, and I think it's all about education and being in the curriculum. It's not doing a one-off session and you say, oh, we spoke about that at the beginning of the year. It's got to be all the time. It's going to be part of your tutoring lessons. It's going to be part of, it's got to be there. Technology is everywhere and we use it all the time. So I think it's super important to have that message going out and in the right direction in part of the curriculum. It's very, very important.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Jerome. And then to you, Tom.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody had some awesome points here today. You want to have a strong firewall or fence, sort of keeping the wolves out, if you will. But then you want to have a proactive way of teaching these positive behaviors, this impulse control. I also look for the blind spots. So one thing I would say, a blind spot in the United States is as kids graduate from an elementary school into a middle school, and then maybe from middle to high school, that's often the point where the behavioral tracking falls off the charts. So we do good at tracking them while they're at that elementary school or the middle or the high school, but we need to find ways, and this is a great opportunity for technology, to track behavior, including mental health behaviors. So, you know, if it's not always that the kid messed up, maybe they were attacked or someone tried to coerce them. So if we can continue to track that all through their schooling experience, we can make the help more individualized, I believe.
That's a really interesting thing. And transition between phases is something which is always very tricky to sort of keep on top of. So that's a really good point. Thank you ever so much, Tom. Last but by no means least, although maybe the most difficult job of all, will be to wrap up with the final tip, Tracy.
Well, firstly, I can't remember whether it was, I can't remember who it was that said it about the question a week. If it's okay, I'm going to steal that and integrate that into i-vengers. I'm going to send a question a week to every school for them to share with the whole school community, so we can have those conversations at home. I think that's a great idea. So thank you for that. Obviously, I should say i-vengers. I think every school should be doing it. So I'm just going to throw that in there. But for me, it's absolutely ProjectEVOLVE. I'm a huge fan of it. It works. It's simple. It's free. It's good. It's updated. It's great. So ProjectEVOLVE most definitely, but also staff training. So making sure that all of your staff, not just your senior leaders, not just your teachers, all staff have regular update online safety training so that they know current trends, themes, they know what to look out for, and they know what to do, and that they're offering an open and non-judgmental space for children and young people to talk.
Great stuff, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Tracy. And what a poignant point to sort of finish on there, really, because as I've mentioned and a few others throughout the conversation today have shared, is about conversations and which links in perfectly to the theme of this year's Safe Internet Day. Let's create these safe spaces to talk and make it so that student voice can really shine through. Just want to say a massive thank you to the panel today for joining me. So a big thank you to, and I work from left to right, Tracy, to Tom, to Al, to Ken, to Jerome, to Emma. Thank you to Katie for running things so smoothly in the background. Thank you to the rest of the team at NetSupport for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation. And thank you to you for joining us for this conversation around Safer Internet Day. And let's hope that every day is a safer Internet Day for everybody. Thank you very much.